In this lesson we're going to be looking at for loops in PHP. So for loops execute a block of code a specific number of times. For example, when you know in advance how many times the script should run. Now in order to create a for loop, we're just going to go into our editor here and open up some PHP tags. Oh, typo there. And then a few lines down we'll close it off. So the for loop syntax is basically for, F-O-R, open and close bracket, open curly brace, and then close curly brace a few lines down. And in these brackets is where we need to specify three pieces of information, three criteria. So although I'm not putting them into the argument at the moment, just to show you what they are. So the first thing is it's called the init counter, the initial counter. And it basically initializes a value. So for example, we could have var equals 1. So we're just creating a variable using our $sign, var, var, so that's the name of our variable, and we're giving it a value of 1. The next piece of information is the test counter. So basically it's evaluated each time that the loop is iterated through. If the condition is true, then the loop continues, and if the condition is false, then the loop ends. So for example, we would say we're going to carry on all the time that var is less than 10, using our less than sign there. We could also say, for example, less than or equals to, but we're just going to go less than 10. And then the third piece of information would be how we want to increment this variable each time. So in our case, we're just going to simply have it add by 1 each time, so that'd be var plus plus. Okay, so there's the three pieces of information. We've got our init counter, our test counter, and our increment counter. So to put these into context of a for loop, again we open our for loop, so for, open bracket, and here is where we place the three pieces of information. So we define our variable, our init counter, so var equals 1, and we use a semicolon to separate these three pieces of information out. Next is our test counter, so we're going to say carry on doing this all the time that var is less than 10, okay, and then semicolon to separate that. And each time we go through the loop, we're just going to add 1 to the var. Alright, so then we can close off our bracket, open our curly brace, and then a few lines down, close our curly brace. Now in the middle here, this is where we would execute some code. Okay, so for example, in this case, we're simply going to echo out var. So we should see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Because remember, we're saying it's less than 10. So we should see 1 through 9. So if we just say echo var, now of course all of our numbers will just simply be in one long line. So I'm just going to put a HTML break tag in there. So we should have 1 and then a carriage return, then 2, carriage return, 3, etc., etc. So go ahead and save that. I've saved this as forloop.php, for-loop.php. So I'm just going to save that. Flick across to our web browser, and if we just refresh the page, and there we have the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. As you can see, if I just move this to the side, we start at 1, we carry on all the time that var is less than 10, and then we increment 1 each time. Increment var by 1 each time, and then we're just echoing the var out. So of course, if we were to change the test counter, say continue this while var is less than 20, just save that and flick back over, refresh the page, and then it goes up to 19. Similarly, we could start var at 5, and when we save that and rerun that, var now starts at 5. So let's look at putting this into a practical application. Let's say you were doing a date picker and you wanted a select box, a HTML select box that allowed someone to choose the number 1 through 31 for the calendar days in a month. Okay, so our var is going to start at 1, and we're going to say continue while var is less than 32. So we're going to get 1 to 31. Okay, so if we just run that, we should see 1 to 31. Now we need to put this into some standard HTML select code. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to break out of PHP and then break back into it, just because I want to show you this in standard HTML in case you don't know. So we have a select box. select name, we call this day. Okay, and then we have our closing tag, and then within a select option we have all of these option value equals whatever we pass into there, and then what the user sees. Okay, so that's your standard select box. Now if we were to just run this, because this is running 31 times, we're going to see 31 select boxes, but that's not what we want to do. Okay, so let's just show you that just so you can see. There we go, 31 different select boxes, and they all have just test in them. But this is the section here that we want to loop through. We don't want to loop through the opening and the closing of the select box. It's just this section in here. Alright, so I'm going to go to the top of the page outside of my PHP tags. I'm just going to cut this out, paste it in there. So there's our opening of the select. I'm going to take out the closing, and that's going to go down the bottom. Alright, let's just tidy up some of the spacing here. Let's take that out, we don't need that. There's our select value in there. Just take these back. Oops. Okay, so we got our opening select tag, our closing one down the bottom, and then we're looping through this in the middle. Now if we save this and run the page, we're nearly there. We've basically going to have 31 values iterated through in our select box. Let's just go take a look. So there we go, there's all our values, but of course they all say test on them at the moment. That's not really any good to us. So instead of saying test, we want to put the value of var. We basically want 1 up to 31. So I can just echo this out, so PHP, oops, wrong tag there. So PHP echo, and we'll just put var. So there's our echo tag. So open and close our echo tags, our PHP tags, and there's echo var. Alright, so now we should see 1 through 31. If we refresh our page, and there we go, 1 through 31. But of course, to make the form select box actually have the value, we'd also need to copy that whole line into the value field, just in there, so the value is also the same as what the user sees. You won't see any difference here, but now when we click, for example, 8, if we were to submit that, it would pass the value 8 through for the select box called day. Now this can be a little bit scrappy sometimes, having to break out of PHP and then break back in. So if we wanted to do this all in PHP without having to break out and break back in, we would go through this sort of format. First of all, before our for loop, we'll say echo, and then in here we'll have our select name equals, we call it day, didn't we? Okay, and then after the for loop, we would also have our echo statement where we close off our select box. Now remember, of course, if you're using double quotes in your echo statements, you must use single quotes within. If you do want to use double quotes, they must have a backslash before them. I tend to use double quotes all the time, and I do tend to use double quotes in form elements, so I'm just going to use that method with the backslash before the quote. So there we go, there's our opening select and our closing select. Now just to keep the formatting right, we should pop into a tab there. Then we put our option tags. Again, to keep this all in PHP script, we say echo, and I'm just going to finish that off and drop back in. So option value, and we want this to be the value of var, so equals. Again, this does need to go in quotes as well. Yeah, quotes, sorry. I'm going to close off that option tag as well. So the value equals, now because we're using double quotes in our echo statement, we can just put the value straight in, or the variable rather, straight in. So we can say value equals var. Okay, and then we can also do exactly the same in here. Now you might question why I'm using single quotes here when I said earlier on that I tend to use double quotes. It's just personal preference. Whenever I'm setting a value of a form element, I do use single quotes, but it's just how you've been used to coding. You could, for example, do that, but I tend to always use single quotes inside. Alright, so if we just save that, and let's run that, and there we go, we're back to where we are. Okay, so 1 through 31. Now let's just have a look at the source code of that. So if we right click and choose view page source, of course it puts it all into one line. If we want to change that, we're just going to go and put a \n, just forces it onto a new line. So at the end of the select, at the end of each option, We don't need one at the end of that because it's the end of all of it. So there we go, we've still got our numbers, view the page source, and now we see we've got select name is day, and then each value is placed into the value and into the option tag. Alright, so all the way down, 1 through 31. So that's how you use for loops. That's a basic for loop, like I say, for something like a select box. But just remember, look at the syntax one more time. For, open bracket, define a variable, say I equals 0, semicolon, what you want to do, so I, well, it's less than 20 for instance, and then finally what you're going to do each time, so we're going to say I++. Okay, so close that off, open curly brace, close curly brace, and then perform your action in here. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. That's the basic for loop syntax. And like I say, there are a few different variations in how you specify certain things within the for loop itself, but that's not for this lesson, maybe for the for loops advanced. But thanks for watching. Hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, just contact us at hello@tuutes.com and we'll help you out as best we can.